Although you see each other for 2 days and you basically don't have much time because it's dinner time and then drinks after dinner and then after the tournament and that's it. But you still build this kind of bond. It's rather peculiar because you don't know each other and yet you trust each other fully and you can talk wholeheartedly about everything. You start realizing that there is a lot more to life than just budo. And budo, in the end, like we just said, is a choice. We can't force that choice on people. We can guide them in that choice. We can make them enthusiastic for that choice. We can make it fun and make them want to come practice, but we can't force them to practice.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Tokskai Inside Look podcast. Today we're speaking with Piotr Kukla from Utrecht, the Netherlands. Piotr has been practicing budo for nearly 30 years, during which time he has won the national championships in Iaido and Jodo in several categories, representing his country on multiple occasions, including placing first in the godan division at the European Iaido Championships in 2016. He's also currently the tournament manager for Iaido and Jodo in the Netherlands, and manager of the Dutch Iaido team. Piotr holds the rank of godan Iaido and sandan Jodo and has been teaching Iai for over 10 years, including several seminars abroad, and was jointly responsible for the organization of the Ishido Cup. In this wide-ranging conversation, we talk about the place budo plays in building up one's character and growing up as a person, and delve deeply into the meaningful relationships in a global community and creating a unique connection that can't be found anywhere outside of direct family. Piotr is such an engaging individual, I found myself talking a lot more than usual, so apologies for that, but I hope you enjoyed this stimulating conversation. So, without further ado, here's Piotr Kukla.
Hi, my name is Piotr Kukla. I grew up from Polish parents in France, and around the age of 10 I moved to the Netherlands, where I still live. As a child I was always very energetic, also known among my mother's friends as the kid that was running on the ceiling, because of the overflow of energy. And when we moved to the Netherlands, the architecture of the houses here is a bit different. The walls are thinner and especially the floors and ceilings are thinner. So when I'd be running around the house, the neighbors downstairs would actually almost every day would ring the bell and ask my parents to keep the kid down. So I was always very much into sports, but as I still had to learn the language in the Netherlands, I felt really awkward at doing anything. And at some point, my parents just got, basically fed up with it, with the downstairs neighbors. And they brought me to a jiu-jitsu school down the street. So I was 10 at the time. That was also the minimum age for that dojo. And at the age of 10, I basically started jiu-jitsu. I had already done other sports as well in primary school, obviously. And then after starting jiu-jitsu, I still did other sports like tennis. I swam for several years, did some basketball. But in general, jiu-jitsu was the one thing I came back to. It was really fun. In the beginning, I was really nervous because I really didn't speak the language. And I thought, oh no, all these other kids will make fun of me, insecure little kid. And actually was okay. The groups were really big when you start out. So it's really popular for kids to just try out things. And then as the years went by, actually within several months, the group went from, I think, 30 to maybe 15 kids. And then at some point you pass your first grade, so the yellow belt. And many kids who wanted to start jiu-jitsu just had that as a goal, or at least they weren't allowed to stop jiu-jitsu before they made the first grade. So their parents wouldn't let them stop. So after the first grading, actually the groups slimmed down even further. And by the time we had done our second grading, so that was orange belt, I think there were 4 people left. And so by that time, we started melting groups. So people who were left over would get into a single group. And actually I did that with a lot of pleasure. And it really helped me in several other things, like getting a bit of self-confidence as well. And around that time, I also got a bit plump, shall we say. And swimming and jiu-jitsu did help me keep in shape a bit. And that was pleasant, shall we say. As we went further on the years, the groups continued mixing because every time, people went to other schools, went to study, moved, just basically got fed up with practice. So as in every budo, you get fewer and fewer people. By the time I got my green or blue belts, I met several people with whom I'm still befriended today, actually. Those were the people that we'd practice 2 or 3 times a week. And after practice, we'd just hang out outside. And instead of just being people you see in the dojo, those really became my friends as well. And yeah, I value those people still. Actually, I was best man at the wedding of one of my best friends 2 years ago. So that was fun as well.
Oh, nice.
Let's see. So yeah, I had dropped swimming by that time already because, to be honest, swimming got boring. You'd basically be in the water for an hour, hour and a half, just in the silence with only yourself. And then, your coach yelling at you to swim faster. And that was basically it. So except for repeated, really the exact same thing, there was not much to it, which, if I say it now after all these years of budo, it sounds a bit silly because that's basically what budo is as well. Although there is so much more depth to budo, luckily. When I turned 19, around the time I was 19, I went to study. I took a year off after high school and I went to study physics in Utrecht, where I still live right now. That did make practicing a bit more difficult because I'd be practicing in the evenings in The Hague, where my parents still live. And then I'd have to travel back, but I didn't have a car at the time, so I'd have to take public transport. I'd get home around 1, and that in itself wouldn't be a problem. But because of practice, because of the adrenaline, I'd just be sitting up bright until, 3, 4 in the morning. And then I'd have to get up for study, which obviously I did not always succeed in. In that sense, my study did take a few hits because of practice, but it was my choice and it was worth it, even looking back on. In 2003, one of my jiu-jitsu teachers started a EI class. He basically wanted to start his own dojo, and he looked for several people who would be interested in doing EI. And one of the things he said that still makes me laugh today is you shouldn't do EI just because you like swords. And the couple of us who wanted to do EI obviously said, no, of course not. But the only thing going through my head was swords. Ooh, swords. I mean, that hasn't changed in a way. I still am absolutely enamored with swords, but there is a very different approach to the entire thing of EI now. But that enthusiasm at the time was, it was almost a childish enthusiasm for something that seemed so cool. Still does, actually. So there were actually, in the beginning, there were 3 or 4 of us when the dojo started. And
all from the jiu-jitsu class?
Yeah. So all of us were from the jiu-jitsu school. My sensei is actually a professional sensei in the sense that he makes his living out of teaching. And that's actually a fun thing. He's the son of one of the first jiu-jitsu artists in Europe. And even after I started nearly 30 years ago, basically. And even now, looking back at it, I was incredibly lucky to have met him and to have ended up in that dojo, because I've seen so many other dojo where the level is, good, but people don't necessarily put their heart into it or don't live it. And for him, he was making it was his bread. So when I saw him move, still now, when I see him move, I'm amazed. It's difficult to find the words. At some point further on in my budo life, I had to stop jiu-jitsu for some time because of the travel, because of my studies. I had a break of about 6-7 years, during which I did continue EI. And then when I came back, I saw him move still. And because of EI, I had learned to look differently at movements, at body movements and at techniques. And I saw so much more than I did previously. And then I realized that he had always been doing that. And just seeing that man move was amazing. It's pretty close to what many Japanese sensei would do in that sense. Because his father was one of the first people in Europe, he literally grew up with it. And he's now, I believe, in his early 60s. Just watching him is incredible. When I started Iaido, I quickly turned towards EI as my prime discipline, actually. I really enjoyed it. And I tried to go to seminars as much as I could and tried to go to tournaments as well. wherever. Well, I mean, in the small world that we live in the Netherlands. And in that sense, it was very different to jiu-jitsu class because those practices were usually 1.5 hours, and EI would be generally at least 2, sometimes more, especially if we'd have a tournament or a seminar. You'd stop from 3 hours and go up to 6 or 8. So you'd get much more practice in, which was really fun. And I remember I started in November, and then by August was my first big seminar. It was one of the big summer seminars that the British Association and Dutch Association used to organize each year. So one time in the UK, once in the Netherlands, so they'd alternate. And there was a huge seminar, which was at the time still 6 days. So 3 days for Jodo, 3 days for EI. I only did EI at the time. And I remember that in those 3 days, 3 full days of practice, I felt that my level had shot up as much as it had in the year prior to that seminar. Just being, well, basically bathed in EI for 72 hours really made a difference. And yeah, actually things like that still do. I still enjoy seminars in that they relight the flame of enthusiasm as well, but also your body gets used to it, and then you get much more work in than during regular practice, I find.
Up to this point, I think we're almost near present day in terms of how you go about your practice. So I want to go back and cover a few things from earlier. You mentioned that when you first moved to the Netherlands, you had to learn a new language. So I'm guessing that when you were younger, you knew French and Polish?
That's correct. Yeah.
So when you had to start doing jiu-jitsu without fully grasping everything, what was the practice like?
What really helped as well is that I really liked it. I really enjoyed the practice. So I forgot quite quickly about the language barrier. And my teacher would actually show everything. So he'd pick one person out of the group to show a technique, and then we'd basically copy the technique. So in that sense, it would be very Japanese. He would show, we would copy. Obviously, there needs to be a Western swing to it. So he would explain some things as well. And in the beginning, understanding that explanation was a bit difficult. But I was lucky that I did pick up Dutch rather quickly. I think within about 6 months to 8 months, I could speak it nearly fluently. So it didn't take too long for me to feel at ease language-wise as well. But that showing that demonstration of the techniques obviously really made a difference, because you wouldn't need to understand what was said if you just looked and observed. So that really worked, yeah.
Mm. Because imagine up to that point, most of your education was done in schools where it's mostly just speaking to you or in written language. In a dojo environment where you get multiple ways of getting input, you can learn faster in some ways, I guess.
Yeah, differently, indeed. You get different input, and in that sense, it depends on how you pick up. I'm usually better at picking things up through audio, so verbal communication, than written. So schoolwork for me was at the time very difficult because I really had to learn that language at school. Whereas listening to it and also looking at it in the dojo really did make a difference. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. When you started Iaido, usually when people start in a non-kendo environment or a pure Iaido environment, something like Aikido or Jiu-Jitsu, it's more of a side thing for that school. Sometimes they're not related to the Kendo Federation at all. What was the circumstance around this? It sounds like they were already connected and this was like same line.
Yeah, it was. My teacher had recently split with his dojo before that. And he started his own dojo, but he already practiced under the wing of the NKR, so the Dutch Renmei, Dutch Kendo Renmei. And as such, the dojo he started, or the group he started basically, was affiliated with the Dutch Renmei as well. At first, we started practicing in the Jiu-Jitsu dojo, but that wasn't ideal because, so as my Jiu-Jitsu teacher did this for a living, the dojo was equipped with tatami, but those were set, as in they were installed. And for EI, practicing on tatami, while you don't have knee pads, that's ideal. But once you do have knee pads, it really didn't work well. At some point, we moved the group to a regular gymnastics hall of a primary school. But at that time, the dojo was already part of the Dutch Renmei. So in that sense, it was relatively easy. Yeah.
Okay, bringing it back to now, you started Iaido. You're, I guess, in the middle of university, in the middle of schooling at that point. When you graduated, how did you start thinking about your time? Now that it wasn't just school, you probably had to look for work, you still had to practice somehow. What was going on in your mind in terms of priorities at that time?
Yeah, so that's a bit of an off story. I did take quite a long time to finish my studies, partially because of an accident, partially because of budo actually, and partially because of, I guess, on account of me not being too hard working at times. Unfortunately, not because of partying. That's what many people think. But so I would put things aside. I would actually put my studies aside from many other things, like going to budo seminars, and I would prefer to spend an evening practicing than an evening studying. So it did take me a while to finish my studies, and by the time I did finish, I was practicing EI and at least two times a week, often three, which is relatively not too much, but it's not that once in a fortnight. What I did actually, I started looking for a job after graduating. Didn't manage in the first place, and then by accident I rolled into a completely different field, which is what I'm still doing right now, which is translation. And that field, as I'm self-employed, I have a lot of freedom in my time management, which sometimes makes it difficult when you're not disciplined enough, but it certainly has its advantages. It basically means I can take off whenever I want, as long as I meet my deadlines. So it did make a difference that with that work, I was able to basically go to any seminars, any tournaments I wanted if I just finished my work outside of that time. And that self-employment these advantages were the reason being self-employed, actually, because I see many people around me who do not have the luxury of that freedom and who struggle to balance a seminar, a tournament, or any actual free time for themselves outside of budo. And in that sense, I'm really lucky. It absolutely has its disadvantages as well, obviously, its drawbacks. But it is, in that sense, a very conscious choice. I have made that choice to be able to practice more. And so I currently practice budo at two different dojo, because Jodo is not offered in my Iaido dojo. So I travel for that. And that means that I can't really easily combine practices. What you often see, for example, is Iai and Kendo together or Iai and Jodo together. And I have to travel for each separately, which is fine. But that also means that for sometimes I did have problem realizing that these were my own choices. I would whine a bit about not having free time. And especially my closer friends would say, well, dude, it's your own choice. It's nobody's making you. And it can be painful to hear that, because you really, besides one thing, you often want to have a different hobby and do more. And then realizing that choices have to be made in life. Yeah, that can be painful at times, that realization. But yeah, it was fun. I mean, I'm still enjoying budo, and it still is my main choice.
And the weirdest thing about this is that you see people around that aren't into budo or have mild interests. And then their future is they'll continue working until they get too old to work. They'll retire. And then how are they going to spend their time? So then there's these upside of committing to a budo, because you know that, oh, I just want to be like these senseis that are like 80 and still practicing and still involved in the community and doing so much. But at the same time, you're like, I guess you're in your mid 30s right now. I'm approaching 40. And there's so much life left in our life. And we've already made that choice. Like for the next 40 years, are we just committed to this one thing? And it can get kind of scary sometimes.
Yeah, so that actually is very realistic and very, very real. It feels very real. When I was so over the years, I unfortunately had to change my EI dojo because of moving as well. But in the first dojo, we'd practice on Saturdays and on Sundays, which means that being a student, I couldn't go out. Or, if I went out, I'd have 3 hours of sleep, and then I'd have to be in the dojo, which wasn't really realistic. Even though I didn't have a Shinken at the time, it was just not a good idea. So I'd often skip parties, I'd often skip going out just so I could practice. And that was really weird as well, because you'd see all these students around you partying and then not doing, because you had made that choice at that age already. And basically, yeah, what you say, budo is if you're serious about budo, it is a choice for life. It's not like football where you can stop at 35 and then relax and watch others play. Oh, it's something we both, I think, pursue for the longer term and intend to keep doing. Yeah. If
And there's this expectation that you're always getting better. Yeah, you're looking at these 70, 80-year-olds. Yes, they're older, but they're still at a level where us, not even quite middle-aged yet, are still wondering how can we ever get that good? And yet when you're in sports and stuff, like I see people playing basketball or ping pong or whatever, when they get old, the expectation is that they will just decline and they just do it for recreation.
Yeah.
But there is this commitment that we always have to improve. So there's never going to be an end.
Well, I guess that's also where one of the differences between regular sports, so to say, like ball sports and budo lie. In sports, it's really mostly physical. So when you're in your peak condition, it's fine. And then from, 24, 26, you start to deteriorate. Yeah, you can't run, you can't jump. And especially if you've done it a lot, it just basically ends. Whereas in budo, you can still improve on your technique. You can still improve on not using any force, which would almost become easier with age, actually. So there's still so much to refine as you age, both in, obviously in Iai, but even in things like jiu-jitsu, just changing your stance, changing one small hip movement or dropping your hip 2 centimeters lower can already make a difference for a throw. Things like that. You can keep polishing that. It's really amazing. And then, well, I guess you get that in regular sports as well. If your body already starts to refuse cooperation, you can always start passing on the knowledge you've acquired over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's actually something as well. When I was doing EI 10 years ago, I think 10 years ago, I was already teaching in the current dojo. One of the teachers, certainly not the main teacher. And I'd actually get annoyed when people would come once a month or once every 2 weeks, because the teachers, the couple of us, we'd always be there. We'd try our best to give them everything, and then people wouldn't come and they didn't take it seriously. And I was, you could almost say, overzealous. And looking back at that, I find it almost childish and very egocentric. We grow, life changes. I finished studying, started working. People around me started in the dojo as well, started families. And you start realizing that there is a lot more to life than just budo. And budo, in the end, like we just said, is a choice. And we can't force that choice on people. We can guide them in that choice. We can make them enthusiastic for that choice. We can make it fun. We can try to be open and make it pleasant for them to come practice and make them want to come practice, but we can't force them to practice. I still see that in some places where people are really forceful, and I've also seen people leave because of that. When I was teaching EI 10 years ago, when I was really hyper, I did get feedback from people that they didn't find it pleasant, that they felt, or they got negative feelings from it, basically. And so over the years, I don't know what changed, actually, what exactly happened to make that change. I saw people get other priorities, and maybe that was it as well. I started doing different budo. So I added Jodo and recently Kendo to my budo. And those two, although I enjoy them very much, they are certainly not my main disciplines. That is undeniably EI. And I started understanding, in that sense, people who do a different budo on the side and do not live for that budo necessarily, but also that budo can also be a hobby for people, and that maybe some people will do it once a month and be happy with it because they just get to wield a sword and that's it. And others will have that drive to practice every day. It really depends. And that realization really helped me calm down as well internally. I think it also changed my teaching, because instead of being annoyed and trying to push things on people, I would try to help everyone as they came. And that's pretty much it. And not let it get to me.
It's about changing the expectations, because up to this point, as a serious practitioner yourself, you're looking around and saying, all these people could be as good as I am, or I could help them achieve the same level of dedication and practice that I have, and yet they're not putting in the effort. And it totally resonates with me, because you look around and some people, you can see this guy's a natural if they just put in the effort, even half of the effort I put in, there could be so much better. And they're not meeting that expectation. And then you have to realize that, oh, well, people are different.
Yeah.
So having gone through this type of experience, that kind of growth, there's the other thing where if you're involved in it at a young age and you made this commitment, you're bound to have people leave that you were really close to. I'm guessing when you're younger, you're pretty much growing up with these people in the dojo. You're really good friends, and it really hurts when they leave because it's like this could have been the future. We could have continued becoming adults, becoming old people, and yet now you have to balance. Now I can't just go to the dojo and see my best friends. I have to now split the time. If I want to see my best friends, then I'm not at the dojo. If I'm at the dojo, then I'm not seeing my best friends. Could you talk about some of these relationships that you've developed?
So about maintaining relationships with people who practice, well, I myself also stopped jiu-jitsu for some time and currently have stopped again. So people from that world is purely friendships that I can maintain. Unfortunately, I'm one of those people who's not very good at maintaining contact, but how do you say that? There's this notion of having great friends that you can see once every 3 years and just pick up where you left off. I have that with quite a few people because I'm actually so much in the dojo, and when I'm not in the dojo, I'm busy with other things. I used to make time outside of the dojo, actually exactly during study time. Instead of studying, I'd be visiting friends who were on a day off, for example. But how I do that now, recent changes in media, like instant messaging on your phone, which is always with you, have made that easier. So it's easier to reach out to friends and just catch up on how they're doing. But in general, there are not that many people that I talk to really regularly. And regularly is at least once a month even. And most of my friends know that, especially the ones from high school and the ones from my jiu-jitsu past. They know that I'm usually basically in practice or occupied doing something around practice. Or if I'm traveling, it's probably for a seminar or a tournament. And in that sense, I've never really done much to maintain it. It's once in a while, somebody pops up in your head again and you'll give them a call or send them a message. And that's pretty much it. But the way you said it, the way you phrased it, did at the time, especially when we were younger, we really grew up together in the dojo. And then your friends that you saw once, twice, 3 times a week would suddenly stop appearing. In those days, it was also easier because for jiu-jitsu, you're still in high school. So you probably all live relatively close to each other. We'd still meet up on the weekends. We'd go to the movies. We things, even larger trips like go to the theme park once in a while. But nowadays, with people scattered around the country and people, actually having work, having started a family, the general consensus of being in your 30s, 40s, just meeting with friends becomes more difficult. And with all the keiko, with all the dojo visits, it really doesn't help. It's actually been easier since COVID started because I usually have Friday, Saturday, Sunday practice. So it'd be rather difficult to find time on the weekends. And now the seminars and central trainings and tournaments on Sundays, which were very often on Sundays, most of them have been canceled. So I'd have more time in the weekends to meet with people. Or, meet, have a coffee at 2 meters distance, or just have a long call to catch up. But yeah, over the years, that's been difficult. Keep up with people, keep in touch with people. Yeah.
I think it resonates with a lot of people too, is that once you've created that relationship, you cannot see someone for a long time and then just pick it back up and it's like you never left. And I'm sure we have that with our friends outside of budo, and then we also have it with our friends in budo, because like sometimes major seminars or major tournaments happen once a year. So sometimes you only see people once a year in that case. Can you maybe talk about a few people that you're always kind of getting together and have this feeling where it's like you never left? And how did that relationship develop over time?
Actually, within budo, there's quite a few of those people as well. As you say, people you see at a seminar or at a tournament. I've been lucky enough to take part in a few European championships. And every time you go, you usually see a large overlapping group from year to year. So you start to bond with people. And although you see each other for 2 days and you basically don't have much time because it's dinner time and then drinks after dinner and then the next day and then after the tournament, and that's it. but you still build this kind of bond that it's rather peculiar because you don't know each other and yet you trust each other fully and you can talk wholeheartedly about everything. And that trust actually was something that really surprised me. A few years back, I traveled around Europe. I took a longer time off, about five or 6 weeks, and traveled around Europe. And most of the places I stayed over with friends of the family or actually budo friends. And as it was also during the week, people would basically greet me and say, well, we can't entertain you during the day because we need to work. And your response was, well, that's fine. I'll go visit the city because that's also one of the things I want to do. Basically, what they do is, this is our house. This is everything we own. Here are the keys. We'll see you tonight. And this was to someone they saw once or twice a year for a day or two. And that really amazed me because it's not something you see every day, that level of trust in people you barely know. And that also made me realize that by far most people in budo, people who tend to hang on longer than a year or two in budo, are really, really kind and good people and really mean well and gentle. And that, shall we say, quality in people really makes getting together at tournaments or at seminars so nice. One of those people that I really love to see again is David Merinero, whom you spoke to some time ago. And for him, we are both in the Shinkage lineage of Matsuoka Sensei. So we are, as we say, family. But with people like him, it really feels like your family. There's this bond I cannot phrase, that you really feel happy to see people, to talk to people. And then actually quite a few of the people you talk to, Teija as well, Teija Pilaya from Finland, and Konstantina I've seen for years as well. I remember her first Europeans actually. And it's just basically you see each other and you hug the ever-loving daylights out of each other the first moment you see them. And there's this passion around people, this kindness. It's one thing that the regulars of the Europeans often say is that they don't go for the tournament, but for the sayonara party. You might have heard that before. And I think many people, I mean, it's not fully 100% that, but that feeling is very understandable when you see how close people who don't know each other are. It's difficult to phrase, actually, yeah. But how do you bond? Basically, sometimes, personally, I've always been energetic. And for example, at the sayonara or at a seminar, I just go around and walk and talk to people. And knowing a couple of languages make things funnier at times. And you just get to talk to people. And then, one person knows another person, and then you're introduced in another group, and then you start talking to people. And then the next year, you see that same person that you had a good click with, and they introduce you to their new team. In that way, you start to know people. And at some point, it's like a homecoming of sorts. You're at a seminar where there's 200 people and you haven't seen them for a year. It feels like seeing your parents again.
I think it has something to do with just the amount of time and effort we put into our practice, that you just know that no normal person that has any kind of negative qualities to them would be able to do that, would be able to have that focus. And I absolutely, I've heard a lot of people say, I come for the sayonara party. But if you didn't see them as someone that has spent a whole year getting better, in some cases, people that you're competing with, that you want them to be better because it makes you better, you wouldn't have that connection at the party. If someone just came and you're like, oh, this person has kind of let his practice go, or he doesn't seem serious, then it's hard to have that connection. So it's only at these kind of multiple levels having that click.
That's an interesting take on it, yeah. I do indeed really appreciate seeing people's hard work after a year and then going, oh my God, I'm up against the next. I really have to try. And yeah, so usually before a tournament, there's usually a seminar, and we obviously separate it into dan grades. So you can already watch the competition and start crying in a corner just to prepare for the next day. But it's really amazing. And then seeing the level in your category, I really, really, really want to give it all tomorrow. And then seeing the same people year after year, especially when you get to the higher categories, you stay in the same group for a longer time. Or when you change categories, you look forward to competing against the people you look up to. That too, things like that really do, yeah, they do play into it. You do appreciate, you do respect the amount of work people put into it. Absolutely.
Up until this point, we've been talking about the practice and the physical aspects, the organization. What are your feelings towards how much integrated Japanese culture, Japanese language, and Japanese history is to these arts? And how do you think about this differently than, say, sports or other cultures?
That's an interesting, difficult question, I think. Compared to other sports, many sports just revolve around winning, basically. And what you see in, not to bash too much, but what you see in modern football or soccer, as you'd call it, those theatrics, personally, I don't enjoy watching that because it takes away the fun of actual sports. But the way Japanese culture is integrated into budo really varies per budo, but also even per dojo. The jiu-jitsu dojo I was in had it integrated to some degree. My teacher and his teacher both were, well, not graduated, but had done their grades in Japan as well. So they absolutely had a good, strong bond with Japanese culture, but it wasn't necessarily the main point of focus or even a point of focus, especially when you're a kid. You know, when you're 10, 12 years old, you go to do some things like judo, karate, or jiu-jitsu. In my opinion, it's usually, in my experience, it's usually about learning to defend yourself, learning to fight, even just making that belt. And knowing Japanese culture to some degree, there will be some introduction to it, but it will not be as strong as what we have in, for example, Iai. That connection in Iai is much, much stronger. Even looking at how people dress, and I don't mean the hakama, but just the neatness of their dress, that really differs as well per budo. And looking at, as my limited knowledge of Iai and Jodo in Europe, there are people who take Japanese culture less seriously, who think, well, we are doing a Japanese budo, that's fun and all, but we are Western, we live in Europe, and we do things differently here. And that's not always appreciated by the Japanese sensei. So actually, similar to you, we have a Japanese influence in our dojo. One of the two dojo leaders, David, is half Japanese. His mother is Japanese. And she has helped tremendously with understanding culture, but also trying to avoid faux pas as much as possible. And I know I've made plenty. One of the important things I was taught about making mistakes, especially the bigger ones, is please try not to repeat them. So I would get berated pretty nicely. And then I try to remember that and not repeat it. Whether that will always happen, I hope so. But it's been difficult. But in that sense, personally, I do feel attracted to the Japanese culture. There is a very different approach to life, approach to interpersonal relations as well. And obviously, as a Westerner, we don't fully understand Japanese culture. So we might just be seeing the nice parts of it and, you know, make it a dream model. So it's not necessarily perfect. Absolutely not. I wouldn't know.
I remember earlier on in my practice, I think it was at least 10 years ago, one of the Japanese senseis, through translation of a Japanese speaker, said, "Why are you so interested in doing Iaido or any Japanese martial art?" So I talked about like the budo aspects and the discipline and how you're supposed to be kind and giving to everyone. And the sensei, she kind of gave a little smile on the side, half smile, and kind of like, if only you knew what real Japanese people are like. But then she genuinely kind of looked at me and said, but that is a expectation that we all try to live up to in budo practice. Even though in real life, in Japanese culture, on a day-to-day basis, there could be these negative sides. The fact that we're in this martial art and we're trying to improve and to live up to that kind of philosophy, it means something. And she's so proud of everyone for taking up that mantle, because it actually motivates a lot of Japanese budo practitioners to feel like they need to step up their game. Because, yeah, because if foreigners can do that, then yeah, who are we?
So there is a sense of pride as well in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really nice. It's so was that also what she said, or was that the feeling you got from what she said?
Yeah, it didn't make me rethink whether or not I should be putting the Japanese up on the pedestal, because I don't think I ever did. I think I was always prescribed to the philosophy and less to the people and the culture itself. but what the lessons are supposed to be. But it definitely gave me a greater sense and feeling of responsibility of making sure that we maintain as much as possible, because we're not only trying to transmit this to Westerners who have less understanding of it, but also to make sure that this doesn't disappear, because if it's disappearing in Japan, then it could be lost eventually. So yeah, there's a huge sense of responsibility.
Absolutely.
So coming to the end of this, I have several rapid fire questions. So you can take as much time or as little time as you want. You can answer with one word or you can go into more detail. But let's start with an easier one. Is there anything that your closest friends in the budo community might know about you that's like a unique interest of you or a quirk in your personality or something that a broader community might not know of?
Well, that's a difficult one because I talk a lot, as you noticed. So most people do know. Yeah, maybe something that most people will not even believe is I do have my very, very shy moments. I tend to be shy around new people.
What do you do in those instances?
I get very nervous to start with, and I have a lot of difficulty introducing myself to new people. But once the ice is broken, for example, I get introduced or I get pulled into a group. At first, I tend to talk a lot out of nerves, and then at some point, I realize I have to shut up because I've been talking too much. And, as time goes, it just smoothens out. But yeah, so I can get shy and nervous.
Okay. Do you have a quote or a proverb or something that you like to live by or drives your practice or motivates you?
For practice, that's an easy one, actually. It's the saying of our ancestors. Today beat the one you were yesterday. Kino no waru kyo wakatte. And basically, the interpretation we give to that is be better today than you were yesterday. So try to improve every day, whether that's in practice or outside of budo. It's a very nice philosophy. And I can't say I live with that every day, especially in practice. In budo, it certainly is something, I think everyone does try to go to practice to improve, not just to be there and check off presents from their list. At least that really is how I view practice. I really go to every practice with the intention to improve. Other than that, I like knowledge. I like to know things. So I do try to learn a bit on a regular basis, whether that's languages or science, my main interests. But yeah, I think that.
Okay. If we were going to go on YouTube, what would be the common recommendations from the Google engine that we would see?
To be honest, that would be two things, budo and video games and hardware.
Any particular channels?
Well, so recently I've been following this channel that's been active for the past, I think, 6 or 8 months. Tokushikai Canada, you might know it.
Yeah, we talk about video games all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do also try to keep in touch with, not keep in touch, but keep up to date with Kendo World. As for video games and video hardware, yeah, almost ashamed to say it, but Linus Tech Tips and Gamers Nexus regarding hardware. And let's see, I do watch Games Done Quick, so GDQ once in a while. It's basically nerds doing speed runs, which is really fun to watch because they're so good at it. These games that you take 10, 15, 20 hours to finish and they finish in 30 minutes, it's painful and really amazing to see. Yeah, I think those are the main ones.
Okay, cool. So wrap this up. Is there anything that you might want the message you want for the audience to hear from you? It could be a reaction to something you've heard from previous episodes. It could be a lesson that you received from a sensei or senpai or someone in the community recently, or just something that you've thought about a lot that you think it'd be interesting to share.
Yes, so maybe relating to something we talked about earlier is whenever you, especially as a teacher, but also as a student, whenever you tend to judge people for their behavior in the dojo and their presence or absence, do realize you might not know everything that's going on in their personal life. And it's always good to try and understand. In that sense, it's good to know your students, your co-students, your teachers. Make sure you're not just someone who shows up at the dojo to practice, but also try to build that family feeling. It also makes practice much more fun. And the main thing I approach budo with is enjoy it. Enjoy practice. Make sure you find something you enjoy. Everyone will have that moment where in their budo career, everyone has at least one, probably several moments, even periods of time where they think, why am I doing this? Why am I going to the dojo? But if you do, take a break, find out for yourself, and make sure you enjoy.
Thank you. That's a great message to share with everyone. This has been great. Thank you so much for having this conversation. I get the feeling we can talk for another few hours, and I can't wait for the opportunity to do that. But I think this is a great wrap for our first conversation. Thank you so much.
And I'd love to hear about you as well, because you just keep asking questions. But I wonder how you started. Sometimes you tell a few things about yourself in between, but you probably have a lot to tell as well. I'm very curious about that. So when's your Tokushikai podcast with Patrick, interviewing Patrick?
Episode 100.
I'm gonna keep you on that. That's amazing. Yeah, cool.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Have a great day. See you soon.
Again soon. Bye. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that episode because we have a lot more exciting conversations to share as we explore the world of the traditional Japanese martial arts. The Inside Look podcast is available on most common podcasting platforms and on YouTube. Remember to subscribe to not miss out on new interviews as they are posted. We're always looking for feedback to improve, so please write us a review or drop us a line at podcast@tokushikai.ca or on Facebook and Instagram at tokushikai.canada. Until next time, thanks for listening.